Resilience. What actually is it? And how do we help foster it in our children? That's what we're going to discuss in today's video. Welcome to my channel. I'm Mel. So first up, what is resilience? According to the dictionary app on my phone, resilience is the ability to recover readily from illness, depression, adversity, or the like. So it's that ability to bounce back from things. Being resilient doesn't mean that you don't have or feel emotions. Quite the contrary. You are able to process your emotions and able to figure out how to deal with those emotions in such a way that they are assimilated or that you are able to move past them. It's not ignoring your emotions, it's dealing with them. Resilience is an important skill for life, and most skills, it's something that can be learnt and developed over time. Very young children can't process really complex emotions, and they haven't yet built the mental and emotional capacity to be able to feel more than one emotion at once. So what I'm talking about here is, let's say, for example, your child is at daycare, they're riding a bike, and one of the other children comes over and pushes them off the bike and takes the bike away. Your child might not even be hurt from that experience physically, but that would upset them on an emotional level. Often children who are very young will react to this in a big, explosive way. There'll be lots of tears, there'll be lots of upset over this situation. For you, it might be a little bit weird, to be honest, because it's not that big of a deal. It's just a bike. But for your child, this feeling has taken over their brain. They are now feeling the all-encompassing sadness and anger because of what's just happened. So I think a lot of adults struggle with the idea that your child can go from seeming to be really happy, having a play, to be really, really, really sad and distraught, to really happy and excited, all in like 10 minutes. So what as adults we do is we are feeling overarching sadness because a friend has just moved away and we're going to miss them. But we're actually hanging out with our children at the playground and we're watching them have a great time. But also at the same time, we're worrying about what's going to happen at work tomorrow and all of the deadlines that we're going to have to try and meet. While at the same time, we're really excited because our partner is returning from a trip that they've just taken. So we have these layers of emotion that we can feel at one moment, whereas children feel an emotion and each emotion pushes the last one out of the way. That's why something that's really trivial, like they took my bike, becomes a really big deal in a very small child's brain. This is another reason why young children really struggle to process those complex emotions to do with grief, because those emotions have a lot to do with our experiences of a person, the life we've lived with them, the way that we know going forward they won't be around anymore. Talking about a death of a loved one, of course. Young children don't understand those really complex emotions because they don't yet have that layered feeling. And that is why you might struggle to understand what your child is going through if there is something happening that is big, like a death in the family or moving home or divorce. What they tend to do instead is they still tend to focus on those small things. They kind of, I guess, process those emotions instead of the underlying complex emotion, if that makes sense. So you might notice that children start to act out a lot more, get really upset at smaller things, things that wouldn't necessarily bother them, get overly upset about the things that maybe we think aren't important, like somebody taking a toy that they had put down but had in their head not finished with, or somebody saying something to them that under normal circumstances wouldn't bother them in the slightest. So keep an eye on that, because that is a moment to really help your children to talk about what's actually going on. And it's still not to say that they will necessarily understand this big complex thing, but they can begin to unpack and talk about what's actually happening. As we grow up and develop our ability to cope with emotions and our resilience to external things that happen, our ability to process and understand complex emotions develop, and our ability to have those layers of emotions so that we can feel sadness without it stopping our ability to still go and have a good time at a friend's birthday party, for example. Resilience is also the capacity to be able to frame things, put them into context, and figure out the level of importance and therefore how we should respond on an emotional and a mental level. So, how can we help them? Well, first of all, the most important thing that we can do to help children develop their resilience is form and develop really strong emotional connections with them. Because having a loving, safe environment in which they can learn to process their emotions and develop their resilience will help them to develop their resilience. If children feel that they are safe, then when something happens that upsets them, they can have an emotional response. They can get upset, they can get comforted, and then through the comfort that you give to them, they can move on. Also, through that process, they learn that it is okay, that yes, they're upset. It's okay to have that emotion, but nothing really dreadful happened as a result of this situation. They're still safe, they're still loved, they're still cared for. So they feel the emotion, but it doesn't have that overwhelming control of their entire brain, because they start to develop that realization that ultimately it doesn't change their happiness and their health and their well-being. I'm not, of course, just talking about one primary caregiver or even two, but everyone in the child's life, whether it be grandparents or a teacher or a carer, provides that support. Like we said before, you'll notice that very young children will have a huge emotional upset response to something that you see as very minor. The best way to deal with that for you is not to tell them that it doesn't matter, but to allow them to feel the emotion and then bring them back into the situation by telling them that everything will be okay and helping them figure out what they can then do to help the situation. So the example of the bike is that we would come over, we would give them a hug. They can start to feel the physical cuddle, the physical presence. When they start to calm down, then you can start talking to them about, I know you got upset because so-and-so pushed you off the bike. I understand how that made you feel. What can we do about this situation? Something like that probably seems fairly obvious. Let's go and ask the other child to give the bike back, which is what I would do in that situation. But if it's something where, and I see this one all the time as well, a child is using a bike, they get off the bike, they go to the sandpit. Someone else comes along, gets on the bike and rides off. The child in the sandpit who was just using the bike wails and cries and carries on, upset that the bike is gone. That's the sort of situation where we then need to give them the moment to be upset, calm them down, and then we talk about, I know you're upset that that person took the bike, but weren't you playing in the sandpit? Yes, but I wanted to go back to the bike. Oftentimes in that situation, the emotion is also about feeling like the person who took the bike was deliberately trying to upset them. This is another thing that children don't understand when they're very young. They don't understand that something that they've thought, I'm coming back to the bike, is not obvious and known to other people. So they need to be talked through that. Did you tell them that you wanted to keep the bike? No, I didn't. They weren't trying to upset you. They didn't know you wanted the bike. In this particular instance, I might do one of two things. I might say, if you want to ride a bike again, let's go and see if there are any spare bikes that you can ride. Usually, that's going to have been enough to calm the child down. Everything's okay. But of course, some children get more upset and more distraught than other children. If they're still very upset and very distraught, I might say something along the lines of, let's go and ask so-and-so if they can give you the bike back. And we'll just tell them that you weren't finished with it yet. Usually that will help. Of course, sometimes you have to continue this on and on because maybe that person doesn't want to give up the bike, and maybe you have to have another conversation about the fact that they're not really under any obligation and so on. But this is where we are modeling and teaching our children about resilience. So by talking the child through the situation and giving them options to help them to figure out what to do, we are naming and giving them the tools to be resilient and flexible in that situation when they're very young and they need that support. As they grow older, you'll begin to need to support them about other things. They'll start to get upset about things that have happened at school and relationships that they're developing. But if you start when they're really young and they're getting upset about those little things, you can start to help them to build the processes of developing that resilience. Another thing that we can do is model how to be resilient. What I mean by that is basically just living your life, being resilient, being flexible in front of your children. We take a step back and think about this is a modeling moment. This is a moment to show my child something has happened that is going to potentially cause me to be upset. How do I be resilient and flexible? It doesn't always work that way, and I know that. I'm not suggesting that if you have a moment where you fly off the handle and just can't cope, that you're doing anything wrong by your child, because that's part of life. It's not going to hurt them to see that. Just start to think about when you are in a situation where you are processing a response to something, processing a feeling about something, and how you can model that to your child to help them to develop the ability to be resilient, help them to develop the process by which you think about these things and incorporate these things into your life. All right. So that's enough of my opinions on this topic. In the description box below, I will link some other YouTubers' videos that I found helpful when making this video. And I'll also link my Pinterest account with some different ideas of activities and some books that will help you and your child develop resilience. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and that you found it interesting and valuable. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to my channel, and I'll see you later.